Hi, can you hear me? Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No, I hope so. Hello, hello. Testing, testing. All right. Get started. All right. Welcome back. All right. Excellent. Hope you all had a great weekend. Let's see. So we're getting started on our third third week. Up to this point, we've been learning about using HTML to create a rough sketch of a layout of a user interface for a web application. And then in our second module, we're focusing on revisiting a lot of the content that we created in the first module to make it a little bit more presentable, right? Using CSS, learning how to this entirely new language allows you to reference pieces of the DOM, right? And describe how is it that you want it to look, right? That certain things should be red, background, fonts, sizes, position, and responsiveness. That things should render either horizontally or vertically. Um, and as you might have realized going through the assignment, it's not easy to make things look presentable using just plain old CSS, right? So we're just going to give up. So instead, or in addition to, we're going to be using a library that is going to allow us to very easily make things look presentable, professional. And so the library that we're going to be looking at is Bootstrap. Although there's tons of libraries out there that do similar things that make things look much better. We still need to understand how it works, and the only way to know is how to be able to read, write, edit, update, override CSS, the CSS language, right? And that was the focus of last week: understanding the language, the syntax, how it worked, right? So that we can come now today and start using a professional library like Bootstrap but needing to customize it to our own particular specification, right? To make it more more specific to our needs. Okay. Again, up to this point, the content is all static. Next week, we're gonna start using JavaScript and React.js. So maybe at the end of this week, we'll get started. And so we're going to introduce a programming language that's going to allow us to make all the content that we've been creating, make it dynamic, right? Instead of being entirely hard coded, just a plain old ASCII files, we're going to make it so that you can respond to user input, as they fill out forms or they add content or remove content or update content, move things around, right? Also, we're obviously going to be able to use things like for loops and if statements that is going to allow us to deal with some of the challenges that we've identified in just using plain old HTML. We found that we have to do a lot of copy and pasting, right? So that there's tons and tons of content that is reusable, right? So instead of just copying and pasting it everywhere, we can create reusable modules, right? Reusable classes, reusable instances that can then be imported and reused like you would in any mature programming language, right? And we can apply all sorts of best practices and software engineering best practices that you've been learning about and perhaps in other courses. So that's coming up later next week. So yeah, we'll be start doing lots of React.js starting the fourth week. I did change the project due date to be on the 10th as opposed to the 4th. That's the latest I can push that due date, since the grades are due a week after that, right? So we have to have at least 1 week to be able to grade it and let you demo it and whatnot. So that's the latest I can push it. I have to have grades about a week after that. So yeah. Also because we are going to be using a database, right? And I wanted to give you at least 1 more week to digest using databases connected to a server and accessing and updating data in a remote database. So yeah, that's the that week it's also the week of the exam, right? The final. That's why I didn't want to put it so close. Yeah, so don't let the project do all the work towards the end. Please start as soon as possible, right? And do all the prototyping as early as possible, and get the server up and running as soon as possible. Connect it to a remote API, and hopefully that last week it'll be just hooking up stuff and integrating the server and the database. But most of the bulk of the work should be already done, right? You should not be that last week tweaking the CSS or tweaking where the navigation. All that should be done much earlier, right? So that you can just focus that last week on just integrating the loose ends of the server and the database. Okay, right? So just please time yourself so that you can start addressing even today. You can start addressing what that HTML might look like, right? What the CSS might look like, the look and feel, right? So you don't leave that to the end. Yes. Oh, the 15th. Okay, it was already posted. All right, I'll update. Yeah, I asked for a room where we can fit both sections, and I didn't know it was already assigned. I'll update it. Thank you. Okay, so it's the 15th, right? Is that what you're saying? So it's so that's the Friday the 15th. All right, excellent. Thank you. All right. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Any other questions? So assignment 2 is due this upcoming Monday, right? And I think you should at least have gotten started with the lab section, right? Have gone through all the lab exercises, and the intent of those lab exercises was to get you up to date with the CSS syntax, right? And give you an opportunity to practice, writing rules, left-hand side rules, right? And then, tweaking the right-hand side. What is it that you want those node elements to look like, right? So you have several exercises to do that. Then the second half of those exercises focus on using Bootstrap. Right. So the labs are actually split into two, right? The first half of the labs are playing around with CSS, just raw CSS, right? Creating your own classes, applying them, and styling content. And then in section 3.2, the intent is for you to practice using Bootstrap, right? And Bootstrap is a library that is popular among developers. It's not geared towards static brochure kind of websites, right? They're more geared towards websites that are not really websites, but web applications, right? Applications that might as well be running on a desktop or on a phone, or natively on your local machine, right? But instead of running locally on your machine, they're actually running remotely on some remote API, remote server, right? So they provide tons of widgets, right, that you would normally find in a web application, right? So they provide all sorts of form elements like check boxes and radio buttons and input fields, and all styled to look professional. All these buttons and drop downs and all sorts of things that you would normally use in building an application. And a whole bunch of types of drop downs that again are nicely styled, right? Stylistic. They don't look like the native implementation. They look much prettier, and you can change different colors. You can put separators. You can have them render to the make them much bigger, much smaller. You can put them up on a sticky heading at the top. You can make them so that either they're centered or they render at the top or render at the bottom. So they're just heavily configurable. You can create all sorts of modal windows that pop up and allow you to enter content, and you can dismiss the modal. Again, things that are common when you're building an application, right? All these are widgets that you would normally, if you were just using plain old HTML and CSS, you would have to build this from scratch, right? So instead, this gives you a library of widgets that you can already use, put to use, and they give you, just a code snippet that you can just copy and paste. And please feel free, right, to copy and paste any widget, piece of code that you find here in Bootstrap. Okay, so we're gonna be learning how to use just a few of these widgets. And there's tons and tons more, but if you're building something that goes beyond what we're practicing here in class, feel free to explore the plethora of widgets that are available here. So the idea is that if you're going to build something that you're not quite sure, first explore to see if it's already created, if somebody already built it as a widget in Bootstrap. And feel free to reuse that, right, as opposed to starting from scratch, especially for your project, right? For your project, don't start from scratch. Also, when we get to React.js, there's also, beyond Bootstrap, there's tons and tons of plugins, React.js plugins, that already do tons of things, right? That might do, 3D rendering, or, there's an entire gaming engine, or, there's tons of things that, again, you would not want to start from scratch. Right, so you could look up these plugins, right? Import them, use them as a component, and then you can build an application around that, right? Obviously, that's not what you're going to submit and say, "Hey, this is my project," somebody else's plugin. But it could be the beginning, right, of a centerpiece where you can then build an application around the users that can log in and use that piece of that tool, right, to then share content with other people and whatnot, right? Whatever the sky is the limit. Okay. So anyway, so this is the beginning of some of the components that are available, and there are React versions of this. Right now, we're just using plain old HTML and CSS versions of these, but there are component versions of these built on top of React.js, which we'll look a little later when we start that. Okay. So yeah, so let's go over some of the exercises that the assignment is asking you to practice. Not all of them, just a few of the more interesting ones. And then the intent is for you to use Bootstrap, right, to refactor some of the pages in Canvas, right, and reuse Bootstrap so that you don't have to reinvent the flex and the ordering and the horizontal layout and hiding and showing content, right? So that because this already provides a lot of those behaviors. Okay. So yeah, so there's quite a few ways of installing Bootstrap. So you could use these that are listed here. There's actually other ways as well that you can actually. Did we already install? Let me see. Bootstrap. No, okay, we didn't yet install it. So one other way to install Bootstrap and make it available, you can from the command line, you can do an npm install Bootstrap. Okay. And so that's going to download and install the library inside of your node_modules directory. Right? And so you should be able to see it now. Bootstrap, there it is, Bootstrap. Okay. And Bootstrap has the source that is distributed or distributable and that you can actually use. It's under the Bootstrap dist directory. And there's two directories under there. There's a JavaScript directory and there's a CSS directory, right? For the most part, we don't need the JavaScript directory, right? Only if you're going to use like modals that you need to pop up, and you need to be able to dismiss it and interact with the form, right? And read the form. Then you would need the JavaScript, right? So if you're using like the carousel, right, where you can go through multiple images and whatnot, then you would need JavaScript, right? But for the most part, you won't need the Bootstrap's JavaScript. Okay, so I'm not going to even go there since we haven't even covered JavaScript just yet. We are going to be using the content inside of CSS. So Bootstrap has grown to be quite a large library. So they've broken it out into multiple small little pieces that can be imported individually. We're not going to do that. I'm just gonna load the entire library, and it's available here, right there, bootstrap.css, right? As if we would have written the CSS file, just like any other Java CSS file that would have written ourselves, right? Style.css or index.css. So we've been writing a few of those, right? But this is a professionally created file that it's been several years in the making, right? And has already it's in version 5 or something, and written by folks that know what they're doing. Excuse me. Thank you. Excuse me. So there's two versions of this file, right? So this file is nice and neat and can be read by human beings, right? There's nice spacing and new lines and whatnot, right? Now there's another version, the min version, right? Bootstrap min.css. Okay, this is a logically equivalent version of this one, right? But this one, notice that it's much harder to read, right? It has gone through a process called minification, right? Where a script just strips out all the spaces, all the new lines, right? That are not really needed, right? By a parser. A parser doesn't really care about all the new lines and spaces and whatnot, right? So it's significantly smaller than its original sibling. Okay, and it's meant to minimize the size of these libraries because they need to be downloaded by the browser, right? The browser, whenever it goes to a website, it downloads tons and tons of things. So, for instance, here, just to this, just to render this one screen, right? If you look at the if we look at the network, right, and I refresh, there's several, hundred of requests that the browser is making out to the server, right? It's downloading all these images, all these CSS files, JavaScript files, okay? And so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be downloaded from the server to render this screen. So any opportunity that we have to minimize and make it, these packages as small as possible, right? We improve the performance of rendering that screen, right? So you'll find that whenever you're installing any of these libraries, they'll have a minimized version, and for the most part, that's all we really need, right? The minimized version, because I mean, it's not like we're going to read their library, right? Unless we're trying to find a bug or debug it or find that something's not working, and we start trying to find what's wrong, right? But we don't really care much. So I'm just going to use this. I'm just going to copy these two files, right? And then under the public directory, to use it, right? What we're going to do is that we're going to create a folder called vendors, and in here we create directory, another directory, Bootstrap, and in there I'm going to paste those two files. Okay, there's a very common way. Yes. Yes, for Bootstrap, some libraries need to have the entire folder, like Font Awesome needs also the fonts files, needs a whole bunch of other stuff, but Bootstrap is okay with just those two files. You can, that's fine, yeah. But you only really need one of these. Also, if you're using the JavaScript, some of the components that need JavaScript, you would also need to copy the JavaScript directory as well, right? Otherwise, they won't work. But we're not going to be using any of those. But for the project, you might, right? So yeah. So this is a very common way of organizing files, especially for libraries that don't belong to you, right? That somebody else wrote, right? That you purchased, right? Or from some open source library. Another common name instead of vendors is just libs, libraries, right? That you've or libs. Just to know that these are not yours. I didn't generate this. These don't belong to us. And then you can use them by just regular linking like you would in any other CSS file, right? So in your labs directory, right, where we were doing the assignment of the second assignment, you can then load the Bootstrap library just by linking them. Link rel and let's see, we got the Bootstrap libs, I think we call it, right? Libs Bootstrap, and then Bootstrap .min.css. Okay. Also notice the order, right? It's the first library that we're loading. Okay, meaning that that's going to give us a base style sheet, right? That's going to take over a lot of the look and feel. It's going to set up a font. It's going to remove certain margins. It's going to do some resetting of the default, right? It's going to be now our new default. Yes. But then in our own CSS files, we might override that, right? We might not like a few things that Bootstrap does, right? So this is going to give us an opportunity, right? If by declaring our CSS files later, right, after Bootstrap, is going to give us a chance to override whatever Bootstrap might say. Okay, so the order matters, right? So first Bootstrap is going to be our new default styling, and then any other style sheets we're going to load after that. Okay. So if we start this again, right? If we go to lab two, sorry, lab two, you notice that the look and feel is somewhat different, right? If I remove the Bootstrap, notice that it defaults to the default font, which is Times New Roman, right? It has a margin all around, right, or padding all around the content. But when I load the Bootstrap library, you'll notice that it kind of removes the surrounding margins, right, and it resets the default font. Okay, right. So now we have Bootstrap, and we can start playing around with some of the behaviors that some of the great things that allows you to do. One of the main features that we're going to take a look at is responsiveness. Right, responsiveness has become more and more relevant in the last 5-10 years, where folks are using more and more phones, right, to access content. Right, it's the largest number of demographics that are using more and more of the phones as opposed to using a desktop monitor to visit websites. So it is important that we cater, right, to to this particular demographics, that this particular it's most probable that if somebody comes to visit your particular content, they'll be doing it on the phone, right? So it follows so Bootstrap follows a philosophy of mobile first, right? That you should, when you start designing any website or web application or whatnot, right, you should start thinking first of that folks are going to be visiting your content with a phone, right, with a mobile application, right? And so which sets a kind of set of attitudes, right, when you're building something, right, that you don't have as much space as you think you do, right, and it forces you to identify what is the most important content that I want to display, right? If I had to show just one thing, what would I show, right? If I could only fit, right, a few things, what would I show? If I only had that much space, would I show the navigation sidebar? Would I show the right side sidebar? What is it? Right? So it forces us to think and identify what is the most important content, and then as a second thought, as the screen becomes larger and larger and larger, right? We might say, oh well, it's a little bit bigger. Perhaps I have enough space to show something else, right? And then I show the sidebars, and then I show the other sidebar, and as it gets bigger, I can splurge more and display more things. Make sense, right? But it kind of resets the set of attitudes when building or designing these applications. If you start from the large screen, especially us developers, we tend to try to cram as much as we can into the screen, right? And we're somewhat power users, and we're able perhaps to consume more content than the average person, right? And we might not mind having a very busy user interface, right? But most people are going to find bombarded or overwhelmed by so much content that you're trying to let them see, right? So we have to step back a little bit and say, okay, well, what is it that is the most important things, right? And then add more things as the screen gets bigger, right? As opposed to starting from a large screen. It's much harder to start from a small screen and then add than starting from a big screen and start removing things, right? So the exercise should always start from the smaller screen and then move yourself way up. Okay. So anyway, so there's a few mechanisms that Bootstrap uses to deal with the complexity of large screens and laying out content. Right. The main mechanism that it uses is called the grid system. Right. The grid system. So what Bootstrap does is that it understands that content, especially lots and lots of content, when you have long form content, right, that you need to read through a lot of text, it's often useful that the text doesn't go from end to end, from one screen side to the other, right? That oftentimes it's better to split it up into multiple columns, right? And this has been known since since the 1490s, right? When we invented the printing press, right? And we started printing books, and we started printing newspapers and whatnot, right? And it's very common if you see a newspaper, right? They have these lots and lots of small little columns, right? Or even magazines, they'll have 2 or 3 columns, in a magazine. And the idea is that you don't want to fatigue the eye going back and forth from left to right. If you have a very long line, right, to go back to the beginning, you might lose where your next line is. Yes, so it's very common theme to break up long form content into multiple columns, and this is fine. How many columns you're going to use depends on the relative size of your screen, right? If you have a newspaper, right, then it might be okay to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 columns, right, with very, very narrow columns as you're reading one small little article, yes, from left to right. But as the width of the paper becomes smaller and smaller, like if you go into a magazine or something like that, then perhaps no more than 2, maybe even 3 at most columns in a magazine. Yeah, but if you go into a small phone, then perhaps you just want really just one column. Yes. So how is it that we can create content that can adapt, right, or be responsive to all sorts of different sizes of the screen? Make sense? Right. So what Bootstrap and many other libraries do something similar, right? What they do is that they create a virtual set of columns, right? They break up the screen into a set of logical units, right, of equal size, right? And what Bootstrap does is it breaks it up into 12 equal parts, right? 12 equal parts, right? So for instance, you can create a row, right? Very much like a table. You have a grid made up of multiple rows, multiple columns, right? Where you can create a row class, and then in there have many column classes, right? Typically up to just 12, right? 12. They came up with the number of 12. It's a very common way of breaking up content in the printing industry. Right? So they've copied a lot of what's already works in the printing industry and media, and so they're bringing it over here for us to use it in a library, right? So for instance, to lay out content like this, to split it, it's as simple as creating a row with 2 columns, and that's it, right? Or if you want 3 columns, it would be just 1 row and then 3 columns in there, right? And by default, all the columns are of equal size, right? By default. And so it's as trivial as doing that. Now you can increase sizes, right, by specifically telling that you want a specific column to be of so many units wide, right? So for instance, this one, it's saying that I want to be relative to my siblings. I want to take 6 of those 12 units, right? So the 12 units makes up the entire width of the screen. So a column of size 6 is taking half of that screen. Yes. Right. So for instance, this 1 of 3 here, right, is and 3 of 3 are narrower, right, than the one in the middle. Right? And the one in the middle is twice as big as any of the 2. All right. So this one is taking half of the 100% of the container's width, right, by saying 6. So it would be it's fractional. It will be 6/12. Right. So it's half of whatever the size is. Right. Another pretty cool thing is that you can nest these, right? So you can have these rows nested inside of other rows. So you can go further than just 12, right? Because you can break up half of the screen into another 12 columns, right? So you can make it narrower, right? So this one is 5/12. So that's a little bit less wide. So you can make all sorts of layouts, right, using this simple mechanism, right? You can also you can also have these columns adapt to the size of the screen, so that as the screen becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, what used to be okay as 4 columns on a very wide screen, you can flip it, you can switch over to only 2 columns, right, in a tablet, right, and then switch it to just 1 column, right, when you go down to a single phone, right. And the way they do it is by specifying logical screen sizes, right? It identifies certain screen sizes that are very popular, right, in the industry, right? So, for instance, and then giving them logical names, right? So, for instance, screens that are bigger than 1400 pixels, they give it the logical name of extra large, right? Screens that are between 1200 and 1400 is extra large. 1992 to 1200 is large, medium, small, and then extra small. Yes, right. And so between the grid system and this naming convention, right? Now we can be very specific and say, well, I want this column layout in extra large, but then switch over to this other layout when you are in extra small, right? So you could say, hey, on a really wide screen, I want to splurge and I want 6 columns. But as we come to a medium-sized screen, switch over to maybe only 4 columns, right? On a tablet, only 2 columns, but then on a phone, just 1 column. Okay. So you can specify by using this nomenclature. And here's a couple of examples where you can, for instance, these are being are targeting. Notice that this says column 8. I want 8 units, but only if I am in the middle size screen, right? So this I only want 8 units, when I'm middle size, right? Meaning if I am in large or extra large or extra small, then this styling doesn't apply. Okay, and you can combine them. You can say, in a medium size. Actually, when you say medium, it's from the medium and above, right? So this applies to medium size, large, extra large, and extra large. But anything below that, like small and extra small, we want to be 6 columns wide. So you can combine them, right? So let's take a look at some examples how this works. Let's see. So H2 grid system. Let me demo this. So first, the simplest. The simplest. If I say div class row, no, not mine. I want to use the just regular equal column. Oops. And so this is lorem ipsum. Let's have a couple of columns. Am I missing a quote? Oh yeah, double quote. There we go. Let's have just a couple columns here. So 3 columns, like that. So there we go. So notice that they behave like a flex, right? Adding like a horizontal layout, right? And these are 3 columns, and they're all the same size. Everything good? And I can specify that by default these columns are of the same width, right? But I can make this a little bit narrower. I can say, well, I only want to be of size 2. Now this whole thing needs to add to 12. Yes. So if I'm 2, then the other ones have to be 5 and 5, right? They automatically take up the remaining space, right? So that everything always adds up to 12, right? So if I say 2, right? So the one in the middle becomes very, very narrow, and the other ones become a little wider, right? So they have a little more space. Right? Make sense? Right? Or it can be specific about this one on the left, and let's say that this is maybe 3, and this one 3. So they both add up to 6. Yes. So they're taking up half of the screen. So the last one, if I don't set up the size, is going to take up the remaining half of the screen. Right. So there it is. So this one is 3 plus 3 is 6, and then you have the other 6 on the other side. Yes. Okay. Makes sense. Very good. Now this might be okay in a in a screen that is very, very wide, right? But as I become smaller and smaller and smaller, I might want to change the layout, right? So for instance, I might say that let's see, if I have these, this is 3 and 3, right? These all add up to 12, right? 3 times 4 is 12. Yes, makes total sense. And in a large screen, in a very large screen, then this size might be okay, right? But as I become narrower and narrower, reading these 4 columns becomes much more challenging. Yes, so I might want a better layout might be that perhaps instead of 4 columns, they should be 2 columns, right? Where you have maybe these would be twice as big, right? And they take up the left and right, and then these 2 just would wrap underneath, and also would be a little wider. It would make it easier to read. Make sense, right? And so to just so that we can just follow along. Say make this red or danger. Yeah, I'm gonna give them colors so that we can see where they end up as they start moving around. So let's give a name. Actually, no, warning. That's yellow. And make this success. That's green. That's BG info. So Bootstrap declares certain a color scheme, right, and gives names to certain colors, right? So for instance, danger is the color red, success is green, warning is yellow, right? And things like that. Or info is like a cyan color, and there's BG, and primary is blue, I believe. Yeah, blue. There it is. So we have these four columns, right? And again, it's way too narrow, right? So I could specify that for a small screen, that this layout actually only applies to very, very large screens. Right? So for instance, only very, very large screens, but nothing below. It does not apply for screens below extra, extra large. Right? So let me show you. So if I say this only applies only for extra, extra large screens. This is only true for extra, extra large. Right? So in an extra, extra large, we don't see any difference. Right? And let me add some spacing here. There we go. But as I become narrower and narrower, notice that it will no longer apply. Right? So if I go, there we go. So notice that this reverts to the normal behavior of divs, which are just block elements, right? That take up the entire width of the screen, right? And push everybody else down. Correct? Right? So notice that there's a threshold right there that the layout is true only for extra, extra large and above. Make sense? Right? But not for anything below there. Right? And the threshold is given by these thresholds right here. So anything below 1400 is not considered extra, extra large. Right? And you can see that as I am resizing right here in this corner, right? It will show the size of the screen when as I am resizing. Actually, only when I have the inspector. When you have the inspector on and I resize, right? The inspector draws at the top the actual size of the screen, so you can see where the threshold is. So if we go right below 1400, we'll see that we are not, there we go. See that? There's the threshold right there. And so I'm skipping over to extra, extra large down to just extra large. Make sense? Right. So if I go back, I can say, all right, so fine. I could say, then I can specify different sizes as I as I go through each one of the thresholds. I could say maybe that in now we're in the extra large size, right? So extra large. So we can just copy that. So we're saying here that both for extra large and for extra large, I want the same layout. Right? I want to keep the 3, 3, 3, and 3. Yes? Right? So I can, if I refresh, notice that I'm back to my layout, right? Up until I get to where? Up until I get to 1200, right? So if I keep going down now, so notice that anything, if I'm above 1400, I have the same layout. If I go below 1400, all the way down to 1200, I'm keeping the same layout. There we go. And then it reverts to its normal behavior. Everybody good? Okay. Now I don't have to keep the same layout, right? I could say that that for extra large, I want a layout, and when I get down to just plain old extra large, I want a different layout. I could say that I actually want these to be a little bit narrower on the ends, right? And then the extra space, I want to give it to the ones in the middle. Whatever, right? I can decide the layout for each screen size as I go. Right. So for instance, I can refresh, and there it is. So that as I get to the extra large, they're all the same. But then when I go a little lower, I might decide that perhaps the middle content is more important, so I make it a little wider, right? I notice that perhaps it's getting too narrow for you to read it, and then I'd say, oh, wait a minute, the center is really the more important, so let me make that a little wider, right? I don't really care much about the side content, and make it a little narrower, right? And I can decide that for each threshold. Make sense? Okay. So again, as I go below 1200, there it is. So it just disappears. And again, I can here again decide different combinations of sizing. I can say that when I get down to just plain old large, right? I might want to keep the same layout or not, right? I might want to decide to go back to my my layout that I had before or not, right? I can decide whatever I want. I count 8, 4. So 3, 4, 4. Oh wait, no. So let's make these smaller. 3, 3, and then 4. If you add wrong, right, and it spills over and adds more than 12, right, it'll just wrap, right? So you'll find that, oh, something's wrong. I made it, and so you have to go back and add. So let's see, what did I add wrong? So 4 plus 3 plus 3. Okay, so yeah, 3 times 4 is 12, right? Or I might make the ones in the middle, or the one on the sides. For some reason, I'll make them larger. Oops. 4. Oh, so I made this 2 maybe. There we go. So again, I can flip around as I'm wrapping, right? I can change the layout. Make sense? Now it could be that you reach a particular threshold and says, oh, you know what? It's way too hard to read. I'm just going to drop entirely the right hand side, right? And I'm only going to keep the left hand side. So I want to hide that content on the right, just entirely hide it, and so I can focus on the content that matters, that it's maybe on the left hand side, right? So I can use classes such as the display classes. The display classes allow me to turn on and off items, right? Either specifically just turn it off and on, or apply those those on and off, toggle them on and off based on the size of the screen. Right? So, for instance, D block shows the content, whereas D none hides the content. Right? It's what it's doing. It's controlling. It's controlling the display property of an element. So, for instance, here you have this div here, right? You have this green div. So by default, the behavior is that it's block, right? It's a display type block. That's why we call it a block element, right? It's behaving using the block behavior that it takes up the entire, it wants to take up the entire screen, size of the screen. Or we can turn it off. We can say display none, meaning don't display it, right? I can't override it here because that's the default display attribute, but we can turn it off here. I can say display none. If I say no, notice that it disappears. So none disappears. Now I can turn it off anytime I want. For instance, let me turn off this blue here, right? If I go to the blue one, which is the last one over here, if I say, D none, it's gone, right? I can turn it off entirely, and hard code it, so it's never there. You might say, well, wait a minute, I thought we want to turn it off a little bit, when it's narrower, right? And not all the time. And that, yeah, so sure, we can do that. We can say, let's see, that actually when it's very, very narrow, it shouldn't show at all. But as it becomes wider and wider and it gets to maybe large screen, then we start showing it. Yes? Right? So D none turns it off forever, right? Up until it finds a particular size of the screen where we do want to turn it on, right? And so to do that, we can combine that with D large. So D none hides it, but D block shows it. D block shows it. So now they're competing. One wants to hide it, the other wants to show it, right? But we can say, well, yeah, but I only want to show it after a particular screen size. I can say, for instance, when it's large, only at the large screen, then I want to show it, right? So there it is. So in the large screen and above, it's always shown. But if you go below, it disappears, right? It disappears. Now, when it disappears, you only have 3, and now you can specify that, hey, we hit that one. Perhaps I can rearrange this so that it can take it can take up whatever screen size I have left, right? Let's actually turn it back on a little bit later. So this one is for large screen, right? Let me hide it a little later. Let me show it maybe not extra large. I'll show it in extra large. There it is. So it's gone. It only shows at extra large and above, right? But here at large, notice that it's gone, and I can take the opportunity to perhaps take up the rest of the screen, right, by this content and say, oh, well, this content is much more important now, right? I hit that portion. I can now expand this, right? This important content, I can expand it. So that's which one is that one? It's this one right here, right? So this one would take up the size of the remaining screen. So maybe we can make this a little bigger, right? Or a little bigger. So I'm taking up that, that portion that I just hid, right? Because now it gives me an opportunity to expand this content over here, right? 4, 5, a little wider, 6. See that, right? So this allows me to change layout as the screen size changes, right? I can hide content or show it, depending on the screen size. Yes, right. And as it gets bigger and bigger, I can just expand and change the relative sizes of the content. Makes sense, right? So we actually do ask you to do something like that in one of the assignments. So this is is example one. Let me show you just another example. In the assignment, we do ask you to create something like this, where you have a div with a row, and then you have one content that has the canvas navigation. One has the course navigation, right? One has the modules, and the other one has the status, right? Remember that, right? One of the assignments asks you to do that, and display them in a row. So we can put it here, class column, column. So they're displaying in a horizontal like this. Let's make this a little bigger. H4 maybe. Is that bigger? Okay. There we go. So we have the Canvas navigator, the course navigation modules and status. And I think these two were much narrower, right? The Canvas navigator and the course navigator were much narrower. So we could say that relatively this should be maybe size 2, right? And this one size 2. These are of much more less important than the modules in the center. Yes, right. And as I become smaller and smaller and smaller, we said that perhaps we want to just drop the status, right? And then as we get even further down, perhaps even drop the Canvas navigator and the course navigation. Yes. Well, we now have enough, right? Knowledge using Bootstrap that we can actually implement this, right? So let's do this. So the Canvas navigation, actually, this would be, I think this the background here was that it was black, right? And maybe the foreground color is white. Is it text? I think. Yeah, the text is white. This one was, I think, red. Class. Red. No, there's no text red. I forget. So yeah, so let's make it so that as it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, the status disappears. Or the other way around, we could think about it. We could say, well, actually, it should never be there when it's very narrow, and only appear when it gets to, say, extra large, right? Right. So we could do that. We could say status actually, right, should be none starting off. Should be starting off as not there, and then show it when we get to, say, extra large. We do a block and we show it. There it is, right? So as I go down and go below extra large, right, it disappears. Yes, right. And same thing with the Canvas navigation and the course navigation, right? They, at some point, I need to get rid of the Canvas navigator. So maybe we get rid of first of the Canvas navigator, right? Maybe we can bring it up, and then as it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, we then hide the course navigator. How's that? Let's do that. So we can say the Canvas navigator, I'm going to hide it from the beginning, but only show it, right, when I get to, say, medium size screen. I want to show it, right? Let's see. So at the beginning it's gone, but as I become wider and wider and wider, I bring back the Canvas navigation. See that? Right. So if I go below, it disappears. As I get wider, it reappears, and eventually the status appears. Make sense? Right. Well, same thing with the course navigator. We can say that I'm very, very narrow. at very, very narrow. The course navigator is not shown, but I only bring it back when I am in the large screen. Right. So let me spell it. None. Sorry, none. So it's gone. I only have the modules. So as I grow bigger and bigger, right, I bring back the backwards medium. I think I want this as backwards. I want this to be in large and have this in medium. There we go. There we go. So right. So in very narrow, I only have modules. As I become wider, I bring back the course navigation. As I become even wider, I bring up both the canvas navigation and the course navigation. And at my widest, I bring also the status. Make sense? Right? As I have more and more space. Now, one thing that we haven't considered is that the modules have stayed the same size all throughout. Yes? Now, we don't see it because the background is white. Okay, we don't see it. So let me change the background of the modules here. I'm going to say, BG warning. Right. So it has that width. And now as I become narrower and narrower and the status disappears. Oh, did I leave it as column? Oh, I left it as column. Never mind. If you leave it as column, right, it'll just take up the remaining of the size of the screen, right? So you don't have to do anything. So that's kind of cheating. So yeah, so as I go narrower and narrower, it's taking up that screen. And as I hide the canvas navigator, notice that it takes up the whole width of the screen, right? And as I go even further down, the modules now is taking up the entire screen, which is great. Right? This is exactly what we want. See that? So it's actually fairly simple, right? By using the combination of the grid system, combination of the D block and the D none, right, styles, right, to be responsive, right, to have the same exact content be available, right, in both small screens or wide screens. Make sense? Yes. Right. You would have to override the width and say 300 pixels or whatever. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's trying to behave like the real canvas. Notice that the left hand side always stay there. These the width of these two columns is always the same. The only one that's changing size is the one in the middle, right? Okay. So yeah. So those set of classes, right, allow you to implement those kinds of behavior of changing the layout, right, based on the size of the screen, and also hiding and showing content. Make sense? All right. All right. So let's take a look at another very common use widget that is very, very useful is list of hyperlinks like this one, right? This is a very common widget, right? You have a list of places that you want to navigate, right? It's very, very common that we have this here. So we could implement something like this using Canvas, using Bootstrap, right? I mean, we could. This is trivial enough that we could implement it without Bootstrap, right? But I do want to point out I do want to use Bootstrap only just to show you, how pretty they look, just on their own, right, without overriding anything. But then also because I want to cover, how do you override look and feel that is the standard look and feel, right? Maybe you want to customize it, and so let's take a look at re-implement this using Bootstrap, right? So let's see. So let me create another section here and say lists. Right? So to implement the lists in Bootstrap, let's visit the lists here. You just use the classes, two classes really, list group and list group item. Okay, and just that, renders a nicely styled list, right? It drops the bullets, right? It adds nice. It converts them into block elements. You can see the entire width of the lists, right? It adds some some rounded corners. It adds some borders around it, right? So it looks presentable. So let's take a look at them. So let's just copy that. So just copy that, right? And let's paste it here. And we can refresh, and there it is, right? So they behave as block. Also, notice one thing that is actually not very pretty. Notice that the entire content is stretching out to the edges of the window. See that here and on that right hand side, which is it's okay with these divs, right? But it looks pretty awful on those lists. See that those lists don't have any spacing on either side, and so this either leaves it up to you to add individual margins and paddings, right, around whatever you want to do, or a very common thing to do is to bring back that margin, right, that Bootstrap kind of took away, right? So there's two ways. One of them is using the container classes, right? So the container classes are, what the name suggests, right, is these are classes that you apply to root level elements, right, that are meant to wrap your entire content, right? They're meant to contain your whole content, right? And so there's a few of them. The more common one is the container class, like this. And notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap my entire lab with this div, right? So I'm just going to put it at the top and the bottom, right? At the very, very top and at the very, very bottom, I'm going to close it. See that? Let's look at what that does. If I refresh, notice that adds those margins that were not there before. See that, right? Well, actually, they were there, and your Bootstrap kind of removed them, and now we're putting them back in. All right. Now, these particular margins, notice what happens if I start resizing. Look what happens. Notice that the width of the content stays put. See that? It's not stretching with the window. All right. That's a very common layout in a lot of websites, right? Where the main content is 600 or 700 pixels wide, right? And it's like centered on the screen, right? It's very, very common, very popular. Now, this particular container, the width of this is actually responsive, right? So as it becomes wider and wider and wider, right, the container will expand, to take up more and more space. So for instance, look, if I widen this, notice that these thresholds, it widens to take up more of that space, and as you become wider and wider and wider, stays put, right? It only increases at those thresholds. Yes, right? That's the default container. There it is. So so it kind of has these steps. Now, when you get very, very narrow, it just goes back to just plain old block. There it is. This is just block, right? But these, have very well defined, pixel widths. Okay. Now, if you don't like that, and you kind of want to go back to the default behavior that was there before we installed Bootstrap, you can say container fluid. Container fluid is a version that just expands the width up to the edges, right? But it leaves out some margins, the original margins that was like 8 pixels. I think these are a little wider. I think that these are like 15 pixels. I think they're a little bit prettier than just 8 pixels. So, but this one is it just expands out to the edges, right? Like the original, right? Like the original layout. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So these are the lists. These are the lists, and you can there's all sorts of styling that you can apply to them. So, for instance, if you want to highlight a specific list, you can apply the active class, right? And what it does is that it highlights it by applying a default background, which is the prime color, which is blue, right? And inverts the font color to be white, right? So it's highlighted. Yes. Now, typically you would only have one item highlighted, but the Bootstrap doesn't really care. You can activate any number of items in a list, right? These are nice for like for headings, right? Or as you're navigating, highlight the particular elements that to show you that that's the one that's currently active, right? So it also has all sorts of styling for if you want to highlight them in different colors, right? So you have all these secondary colors, red, yellow, and these are well-known names like primary is blue, secondary is gray, success is green, danger is red, warning is yellow, and so they follow this color scheme all throughout their entire classes. Now they didn't go with actual colors, right? Because they wanted you to be able to override them, right? So by default, success is green, but you can make your success color something else, right? So you can override the color, but you can still use the same theme, right? Now, if you don't like the default styling of Bootstrap, there is a marketplace where you can. There's all sorts of open source overrides to Bootstrap that can spruce up your website a little bit so that it doesn't look like the default look and feel for Bootstrap, right? So these are some of the free ones. One that I use often is this one, the United. I like the font, and the color scheme is a little more appealing to me. There's some weird ones here with some Gaussian effects and some backdrops. And there's also some that are these are all free, and you just have it downloads just a single file. It's the bootstrap.min.css, and you just drop it and it substitutes the one that we got when we installed it, right? And but it uses the same classes, exactly the same, but it overrides the all the styling. Now there's a whole bunch of paid for versions that are much more advanced and have tons of other stuff that we're not going to be using. But you're welcome to take a look at what they have, what they offer, for creating dashboards, for creating very very advanced user interfaces. So lots of different widgets and professional styling. You're welcome to take a look at it if it's useful to you. Okay. So anyway, but we're going to be learning how to override Bootstrap ourselves, right? In particular, to see that if we can make things, for instance, the list to look like this, but still use the Bootstrap layout. Okay. So for instance, the styling for this would be that the hyperlinks are red, right? The highlight when it's active, right? It changes the font to be from red to black, and instead of highlighting the background color, it changes the border to the left. See that, right? So we're going to learn how to override the styling of lists, of Bootstrap lists, so that it looks like these as opposed to the default styling. Yes. All right. So let's take a look at that. So say I create one of these lists, right? These are the default ones. So these are default. And let's recreate the let's see, the course navigator, right? The course navigator. So you have UL, you have LI, and you have home. And so I'm going to use the list group here. And these are the list group item. Why is my IDE not helping me? So there. So we have a home. What else? What else we have? What else we have? Piazza. We have Zoom. We have grades. And we have assignments. Okay. So right now it renders like the false lists. Yes. All right. So we could style this by saying that this is a course navigation, and I'm doing that so that I can target, right, any UL with the list group class combined with my class that I just came up with, right? So that whatever styling I come up with is only going to target those lists that have that class applied to them. Yes, it's not gonna. I don't want it to apply to all ULs because I have a whole bunch of ULs, right? I have a whole bunch of lists. I have I could use the UL list group for the left-hand side over here. I can use the UL for these lists over here. So there's all sorts of lists that I can reuse, and I don't want them all to look the same. Yes, right. So I'm going to target that particular UL for the course navigator with this WD course navigation. Make sense? Right. Well, I guess I could do this where I think I had didn't I have a in Canvas a course navigator? I did, right? There it is. This one, right? Yeah. So let's take a look at this one. I think we had tried. Oh yeah. We had already started implementing this. So I wanted to show you how to do it using Bootstrap, right? So let's create a Bootstrap version of this. So let's visit to see what this looks like, right? So it looks like this, right? Canvas, course navigation. Yeah, there it is, right? So yeah, so we did this by using the default CSS, right? Just plain old straight CSS. So let's look at doing this, but using Bootstrap. All right. So let's it's this. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to rename this so that that's not the default one. It's this one. Okay. All right. And let's see. So right now it's using the CSS. I'm going to break that. Okay, so we're back to its default look and feel, right? The default ugly look and feel. And so let's create a CSS here just for us to play around. Let me rename this. So it's not this one. I'm going to create a new CSS to show you how we can override it. Index.css. All right. Okay, so first of all, let's bring in a Bootstrap over here, right? And see what it does. So let's do a link. And we can say it's in libs, right? It's a Bootstrap, and then bootstrap.min.css, right? Is that it? There we go. All right, so that's the default, and we're going to style this to say that there's a list group, right? And that these are going to be list group item, right? And we're going to apply these to all my lists. There we go. So there's our list. We don't have any margins, but we can fix that in a minute. And so yeah, so that's the default styling that Bootstrap gives us, right? So we want to override it. And so to override it, what we could do is that we can take a look at the CSS that is already being applied by Bootstrap. We can see it. We can see that Bootstrap, right? This line item is being styled. It's being styled by these classes, right? See that list group item first child. The UL is right there. It's a list group. What is it doing? It's doing all this padding, all these margins. It's applying some margins over here, right? Also these line items, the list group item is adding this position, this block, this padding, this color, the text decoration, the background color. See that? It's setting the border, right? And we can see the effect by turning it off. If I turn it off, notice that, right, we can see what that is doing. See that? So for instance, the ones that we don't want borders, right? So we can override it by turning off borders. See that? Right? The background, notice that by default is using this white, also changing the text color. The color is setting it to black, right? Or let's see, the hyperlinks, what is it doing anything to the hyperlinks? The cursor is just setting the cursor. That's all it's doing, right? It's text decoration has a underline, but we can turn that off. Right, so it's not underlined, or the color. All right, so it's overriding the color to be always blue, I guess. So we can override that. So let's override it, right? So let's do some overriding. So let's see. We can define our own CSS, and notice that I'm going to declare it after Bootstrap, right? So first I load Bootstrap, then I load my index.cs, so I can override whatever Bootstrap says, right? So one of the things that I want to override is that I don't want the borders around the LI. So this over here. So the rule that Bootstrap is using to target those elements is this rule right here, list group item. So I'm gonna recreate my own. I'm just gonna copy this list group item. Right? I'm gonna paste it inside of my own index.css. I'm gonna paste that in there and says, okay, well, what do I like and what I don't like, right? Well, I don't like the border. So I'm going to override it. I'm going to say just none. I don't want any border. Right. So now this rule is now overriding, right, Bootstrap's rules, right? Because, right, we first are loading Bootstrap rules and then ours. And because ours are loaded afterwards, they're overriding the ones that are already defined. Yes? Right. So that if I reload, notice that it has no borders. Make sense? Right? And we can see it here, right? If we look at the LI, notice that this is the one that Bootstrap defined. Oh, wait a minute. No, sorry. This is the one that Bootstrap defined, and notice that they're all stricken out. See that? Stricken out, saying, yeah, I mean, I tried to apply this rule, but somebody overwritten me, so none of these are being applied. These are the ones that are being applied, that the one that I created in the index, my index.css. Make sense? Right? Where the border is none. Right? Now, I might not need to implement all these, right? For instance, do I really care to override the position or the display or the padding? Maybe not, right? So the ones that I don't need to override, I might just leave them the way they were, right? So I might go back and say, well, I don't really want to do any of that. Right? So I'm just turning off the border, right? So then the things that are being applied to the LIs is a combination of what Bootstrap is already doing, right? The position, the display, the padding, the color, blah, 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 except the border, because I am overriding it to be none. See that? Right? So the resulting is a combination of both. Right? So what about active, right? So for instance, if I turn one of these on and say active, the default is to override the background, right, and to make it blue, right, and the foreground, I think, to make it white. And so I can see active here. It's right here. It says .active is trying to set the color to be white, the background to be blue, and the border to be blue. See that? So I can override it. I can say, well, actually, no, I don't want you to change the background color. I want you to leave it white. Yes. And instead of the border being blue, I actually want you to turn on just the left-hand side border, right? And leave everything else alone. Yes? Right. So again, we can copy the rule that they're implementing. So we can copy that, right, and bring it over to our own CSS and say, okay, well, yeah, Z index, probably I'm going to leave it alone, right? The color, I think what we want is to be black color. Background, I still want it to be white. Leave it as it was before. I think it was white. And the border, we're going to turn off the border. We'll turn off the border, but then I'm going to turn on just the left-hand side border. I'm going to say border, um, border left, right? I want it to be 2 pixels wide, solid black, right? And there it is, right? See, notice that now by applying active, okay, I have overwritten it so that it keeps the same background, but it's highlighting the left hand side, side border, as highlighting it. Okay, and with the anchors, I'm not sure what we're doing with the anchors, but surely we can turn off text decoration. We could say, I don't know, none. We don't want any underlines, right? We don't want any underlining. Also, we want the color to be, I think, was it red? Was it supposed to be red? Or the hyperlinks should be red. So we can override that, right? We can say that under. Now also notice that one thing that we kind of forgot. So our rules here, this index.css is targeting every single list, right, on the screen, right? If I load this up in my index.html, it's going to target every single list. So they're all going to look like this, okay, right? So instead, we should narrow down our rules to where exactly we want it to apply. Yes. For instance, we only really want to apply this override. This override should only be applicable in a UL that has a class of WD course navigation, right? So that this override doesn't spill over to other lists that are supposed to look, something different. Maybe the background is black, right, and the foreground is white, and has icons and something, and the highlight is background is white. Yes, right. So to narrow down our context and say that this only applies to lists that have a class of WD course navigation, we can go back to our rules and say, these list group items have to be inside a UL whose class is WD course navigation. See that? Right. So we're narrowing down the rules. Yes. That's true when we go to React.js. Right now, we have all these several disparate CSS files that we need to independently load, into one single resulting HTML document. But yes, eventually, when you do an npm build, right, it takes your dozens of JavaScript files and it compresses into one single JavaScript file, and all your CSS files get compressed into a single CSS file. So that's why React.js, we tend to design it so that things are modular, right? And they do have scope, and then the compiler, when it builds it makes sure to maintain that modularity and that things are still within their context. Yeah. Here we're forcing the context, right, by applying this rule, right, prepending it with this, right, saying that only this override of the list group item only applies to ULs that have that particular class applied, right? Okay. So if this I need to you need to apply it to all of these, right? So that does it still work? Yeah. Oh, so the hyperlinks. So what do we do with the hyperlinks? In the hyperlinks, we want to turn off the color decoration none. The color is red, actually. Yeah, so color is red, except active, right? When it's active, the hyperlink should be black, right? So there should be a rule, something like blah 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 blah, and then when it's active, the anchors under there, the color should be black. Yeah, so that way, if it's inside of a line item that has an active class, yes, right. So notice that rule, right? It says that anchors. So normally anchors would be just red, yes, right? But because I'm inside of an active, notice the the containment rule, right? That A is inside of a line item that is active inside of a UL that is a course navigation, right? Then the color is black for that particular line anchor, right? But all other anchors, like this one that doesn't have active, like that one, okay, it's just inside of a list group item that is not active, so that the anchor in there, right, the color is red. See that, right? All right, so we should be able to just copy this. We should be able to just take this index, right, for the course navigation, and then go back to maybe the assignments, right? The let's see, what do we have here? Courses. We have assignments, grades. Okay, so we have the grades, so we should be able to just paste in here, right? The right. Let's see, localhost 3000 canvas. So if we go down to grades, we never style this. We never did style this. So what we should be able to just paste in here our canvas navigation, but then we need to load in our well, this should be a full-blown HTML document, right? And so like that. And then in here, we can bring in the Bootstrap, and we should be able to bring in the course navigator, which is canvas, then courses, then course navigation, then what's in there? Index.css, right? There we go. There we go. So we're able to bring in, right, the implementation of the course navigation, that we style it with the right active, with the right, whatever. Now these are grades, so we would highlight the grades, right? So we would go back here and where is it? So instead of this being active, then the grades are active, right? There we go. Oh, we still have some rounded corners that we never addressed, right? So we can turn that off. We can say, okay, well, let me override that. Bootstrap likes everything rounded corners and whatnot. And notice that the first line item, and the last line item. Where is it? Line item, or is it UL maybe? Is it the UL gravity? So somebody's adding the border. Okay, there it is. Border radius. See that border radius? That's causing the rounded corners. Right? If we turn that off, okay, notice that it becomes flat. Right? So again, we should be able to override that. That's under the list group. So we can make that change permanent by going back here and saying that the UL course navigation, right? If inside you have a list group, I want to turn off the border radius. So border radius 0 pixels. No, that didn't work. Line item. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Okay, notice that this is a combination. Notice I removed the space. Notice I removed the space. That means that this is a class applied directly to the UL, not a child of the UL. See that? It is because it is the UL. So that worked, right? It is the UL, right, that has the class list group. See that? Right. So if you don't have spaces, right, all these classes are being applied to the same element, right? And that's actually the case, right? Notice our UL has both classes being applied. See that? Both the WD course navigation and the list group, right? So if you concatenate multiple classes, right, you're saying, well, the URL that has all these classes applied to them, right? Has the WD course navigation and the list group class. And what am I doing with that? I am setting the radius to be 0. I don't want border radius, right? So notice that now it's not rounded. And just to make sure, right, we might make the first line item active to make sure that it's not rounded. Indeed, it's not, right? The first one's not rounded. I was just checking to see, make sure that we turned off the roundedness. There we go. Make sense? Right. So next week, when we start playing around with React.js, instead of us copying and pasting active, right? Eventually, these ULs, these line items, these hyperlinks, instead of having to copy and paste these things over and over, right? Instead, we're going to have an array. We have an array that has the strings, home, modules, assignment, piazza, grades, and zoom, right? And there's going to be a loop. Right? There's going to be a loop that says just iterate and just over that array and just build me all those line items, right? And already you'll have some JavaScript that will look at the URL and it will automatically, apply the active class as you click, right, the different hyperlinks, right? It'll say, oh, where am I? I'm in the assignment. Boom, it's going to highlight the assignment, right? Or I'm in the modules. It's going to highlight the modules, right? As opposed to us, manually, moving classes and applying them where we want. We're going to automate all that using JavaScript, right? And it'll be a single place where you maintain this, right? As opposed to copying and pasting it in 10 different places, right? But that's starting maybe at the end of this week, right? Okay. What else? So the intent is for you to use what we just learned, right? To apply it to this left-hand side and do the same thing. The apply using UL, right? List group and things like that, right? To implement the Canvas navigator, right? And override the highlight there. The highlight is white background, right? A white background and red foreground or something like that, right? And like that. All right. What else? The Bootstrap also provides tons and tons of support for forms, and buttons and drop downs and things like that. So the intent is for you to revisit the the forms that we are using for the in the assignments for the profile, right? The assignment editor, okay? Those have extensive form elements, yes? So the intent is to revisit those and start applying some of those classes, right? So for instance, if we take a look at the assignment editor, right? So let's take a look at the assignment editor. So this is courses, assignment editor, right? So we're going to revisit this and start, applying some Bootstrap classes so that this will become much more presentable. So let's just show you a few. Now the simplest and most common class used in styling forms is the form control, right? If you look at the documentation, you'll find form control all over the place. So if you go to go to forms. So forms, allows you to style the form elements so they're much more presentable, and you'll see a lot the form control appear quite a bit, right? And one of the major things that it does is that input fields by default are inline, right? They want to render inline with the text, yes, and they wrap, right, and they flow the text, okay. And I mean, it's fine with large screens, but on phone elements, the most likelihood is that if you're looking at on a small screen, the input field you want it to stretch out to take up the entire screen, from edge to edge, Okay. I mean, the screen is not going to be big enough to maybe show two input fields side by side, right? The screen is way too small, right? And people are going to be interacting with these forms quite a bit. So you want to, just make the clickable area as you're tapping and selecting input fields and tabbing between the input fields. Make it as wide as possible because you're going to be clicking lots of these things, right? Check boxes and radio buttons, right? Scrolling, and so small screens are much more challenging. So one of the biggest changes that they make is that all input fields are converted from inline; they're converting into block. All right. So now instead of flowing with the text, they take up the entire width of the screen, right, and just push everything down and create a vertical spacing. So that's one of the major things. The other minor things is that they add rounded corners everywhere, right? Nice focus. So the styling is a little more prettier, right? So let's start using some of that. So here's the assignment editor. And so let's style a little bit. And we can do that first by bringing in the Bootstrap. So there's libs Bootstrap, and then the Bootstrap min.css. Okay, so already looks a little with a different font, right? And actually, instead of you overriding the font, you can just use the default Bootstrap font, right? As long as you're not using Times New Roman, right? And using either Arial or Verdana or whatever Bootstrap is using, that'll be fine, right? It looks much prettier. So all these input fields, if you remember, we put breaks everywhere. See that? We put all these breaks because the default behavior is that these guys are inline, not blocks, right? But as you start styling these as form controls, right? They now become block elements. They take up the entire width of the screen, right? So the break is now not as needed. So we can remove the breaks. Okay, same thing with text area. We set the columns and the rows, but we can just style this with a form control, right? And again, now it's wide as the screen. But notice that they're flush. See the input field and the text area, they're flush. So the break might fix that. But using breaks is considered to be a bad practice. So instead, a common thing to do is to take up all your input fields, all your text areas, and add just like a 5-pixel margin, right? So that all forms are nicely have nice white spacing all around it, right? So they're not flush with one another. Okay, and right, and we can do that with a CSS here, and apply a margins for that specific screen. All right, we'll do that when we come back later this week. All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone.